Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off.
Hello, everyone. This is Ryan, the original outlaw of the airwaves, bringing you a VIP episode of Hero Paranormal Podcast. Coming to you from the base of La Madre Mountain in the Mojave Desert, south of Area 51, Sin City, Nevada. The most illuminated place on planet Earth. If you haven't checked out Hero Paranormal, please do. Drop $1 or more a month, and you just entered a special club of very few individuals, helping me pay for websites, podcasting fees, costs, and much more. Plus, begin to get patron-only episodes. Also, if you want to donate just once and don't want to worry about the monthly recurring, just donate and then cancel. Boom, you're done. But I must warn you, we are the best deal in the game, in my opinion, with solid content, lowest prices, just $1 or more. Anyway, roll over to heroparanormal.com, make it happen. What a time to be alive, ladies and gentlemen. Apocalyptic plague after apocalyptic storms, earthquakes, seismic activity, you name it. Deadly man-killing viruses, 5G technology to make our phones work oh so much faster. Horrific events such as the Las Vegas shooting, which I may add someone has written a book about. The author Solomon Samedi has a pre-order available, and I have shared that on the Hero Paranormal Facebook page, social media. But back to the apocalypse. Where was I? Oh yeah, 5G, Vegas shooting, murder hornets, heck, protests, BLM, Antifa, far right, false media narratives. Whatevs. Bag it all. Bag it all. In the light of the fake news, a problem, reaction, solution, strategy, right out of the good old boys playbook. Some, sadly, these overemphasized, overly dramatized, and possibly scripted media events may possibly be scaring us on purpose. What I mean by that is people have lost sight of what real fear is. In historic periods, tribal clans camped together for safety, usually with a fire between them. For something lurked in the dark. If not, they would surely just all camp alone and keep to themselves. But this was not the case. This was not the case at all. They knew something lurked. Something used the darkness as cover. All clans, tribes, and nomads agreed. Evil lurks. We have lost sight of what true evil is. Evil is represented by the serpent in the Bible. Reptilians and other evils. We are very blessed to have Scott Allen Roberts, aka Scotty Roberts, explain the pervasive presence of the serpent in human history, religion, and alien mythos. Scotty provides a well-balanced, innovative, and insightful approach to the enigma of evil. Scotty is publisher at Intrepid Magazine and has volumes of writings, and his books should all be read. Rise and Fall of the Nephilim, etc. Too many. In a strange twist, I found that Scotty was close friends with someone else I respect very highly, but we will get into all that. The Anunnaki, they're Sumerians, and that's not what I learned in Sunday school. My man, Scotty Roberts, welcome to the Hero Paranormal Podcast.
Hey, Ryan.
Hey, Scotty, how you doing?
Guys, I'm going to be outside. Look at me. Do not interrupt me, okay? Unless somebody loses a limb. All right? Okay. That didn't even work when I was in studio today. In the studio, on the mic, on camera, two guests from MUFON, and my kids had to interrupt with screaming tantrums about fighting. You know, kids.
It happens, I do. And
Yeah.
I've got a 18-month-old and I'm expecting another, and they react whenever you least expect it.
You know, yeah, I have 6 kids, and I've got 3 from a previous marriage that are all grown up and out of the house. I got 28-year-old twin daughters, a 19-year-old son, and now I got a 10-year-old son, 8-year-old daughter, and a 5-year-old daughter. And so, believe me, when they were home for the last 2 months for this whole shut-in sequestration COVID thing, they've now been home, about the length of a summer. And now we've got summer to go through before they go back. So, at least they can go outside now.
Exactly.
It was winter when it started.
It's been forever. It seems like forever. It's good to get out and go to restaurants.
Yes, sure is.
I love the style of your writing in the book, and I just want to talk about, man, that's not what I learned in Sunday school, and the Anunnaki and their Sumerians. Let's get into that. That's some great stuff. On a spiritual level, you felt your personal universe was very small back in the days of your youth because God was just God before you did all this research. Let's go into the research and where that led you.
Okay, let's do that. I'm sorry, are you recording now? Are we ready to roll? Or
Yeah, I'm recording, but yeah, it'll be a success. No worries. All good in the hood.
Right.
All good in the hood.
I'm ready. You want me to just start talking, or did you want to
man.
the question again?
Let's just go into it. The how all this surfaced and where it came from and all the research and where it led you.
Sure. Well, as a lot of people know, my background is one of very conservative fundamentalist Baptist, not through family, but when I was a kid, I went to church. I became a born-again Christian. I followed all that through the youth group, and I went to a Bible college. We were all supposed to go to Bible college because that's the only way you could be in God's will was to go to Bible college. So I went to Bible college, and after that I went to seminary. And in the seminary, I was in seminary for 2 years, and of course very much deeply steeped in my faith. And I became a youth pastor. And I worked as a youth pastor with kids, and so I tried to keep everything relatable to kids, to not small kids, but I mostly worked with teens. And so I wanted to be relatable. I wanted them to figure out why they believed what they believed. That was one of the big series I did with the kids. There was one day I just stopped and I asked the kids in the class. I said, I got to ask you all, why do you believe what you say you believe? And I got all kinds of answers. Well, because this is the church my parents have gone to. This is where I've been all my life, and my parents are Christians and so on. And I said, well, that's not a biblical concept. I said, let's talk about why you believe what you believe. And that really started me on my path for the next 10 years for myself of saying, why do I believe what I believe? And the more I researched, the more I studied on certain topics, the more I had questions. And I would ask my questions. When I was in seminary, that's the first that the issue of the Nephilim got shot across my bow. I had always heard about the Noah and the Ark story, but I never knew that that the first 4 verses in Genesis 6 dealt with the Nephilim and the Watchers, the sons of God, who came down and intermingled with the daughters of men and had children by them, that was the preamble to the flood story. And so I would ask the question, who are these guys? Who are these beings that came down? And I was told, oh, Scotty, don't go off the deep end. That's nothing more than the sons of the aristocrats who built the schools of the prophets. And they went literally down into the valley, slumming with the common women. That's what that means. They're just all humans. And I said, you teach us in seminary, right here in this seminary, that words mean something. And we study the original languages for a purpose. You've ever been to church and you heard a preacher say, now we're looking at this verse of this passage, and in the original Koine Greek it says, and so this is what they were teaching us. And I said, now in the Hebrew, it breaks down these characters. It says these watchers, these sons of God, as it says in English, which in Hebrew is the B'nai Ha-Elohim. I said, it is those who are of the Elohim. And Elohim was the name used for God almost 3,000 times in the Old Testament, which when you started breaking the Hebrew of that word down, literally meant El was the name for God. Ahim, him being the Hebrew suffix tacked on a word to denote plurality. And it said, so it is literally interpreted, the name for God almost 3,000 times in the Old Testament means, by definition, God among or of many gods. I said, what does that mean? So you've got these characters, the B'nai Ha-Elohim, the sons of the God of many gods, come down and intermingle with the daughters of Adam, it says in the Hebrew, of a man. And I said, there's a stark contrast in the language. So you're telling me these other guys are humans too, but they don't use the term Adam. They use the term Elohim. What does that mean? And I got kind of a wink and a nudge saying, well, we don't talk about Scotty, just what we're here to talk about and teach, keep it under your hat. Don't be a troublemaker. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And so that really started my quest way back at the very beginning of being in ministry. I was still in my seminary days. I was 21, 22 years old. I had these questions. And so as time went on, I kept studying these things, and I got a little further away from the faith when I found out that there were more things that we were not told that kept getting uncovered, and that there's more explanations, there's deeper explanations. Not to get off topic, but I recently did a big study on the life of King David, and I subtitled it, A Real Life Story of a Fictional Hero, because the biblical account reads like an apologetic for this guy, that many of the things that we think we know about these characters are very different when you start digging in and researching. Research, people said, you're going to research yourself right out of being in God's will. And, you can research too much and you ask too many questions. And I said, but aren't we supposed to ask questions? And so I had problems with things, and I almost got angry about it. Overall, it was an anger against the church, an anger against God, an anger against what I was taught, because I'm finding out that these things were different than I was being taught. And if I had heard one more time in the faith that, you are a Baptist first and then you are a Christian, I said, whoa. I said, so God's going to ask me at the pearly gates if I'm a Baptist rather than am I a Christian? I said, I don't buy that. I don't buy that line. And I started looking into it. So all of these things was a big stew pot that was going on to say, I'm not a denier of God, but because of what I was taught, ending up being so many different things than what I was actually taught, it started making me question the faith altogether. And so I don't disbelieve that there is a God or a creator or an originator, as some religions out there will tell you, an originator. I don't disbelieve that there is a God or a supreme being. I have a problem with some of the denominational aspects. I have a problem with Christianity. I did, on my own radio show for 2 months, we covered Gnostic mysticism and how Christianity in the first 2.5 centuries after the death of Christ doesn't even resemble what we know as Christianity today. And so I started digging into all of that, and even those start creating a bit of a wedge, a bit of a division, even a wider division. So as I started studying all of these other things, the Nephilim, and then you hear, the Bible doesn't mention reptilians per se, but it has reptilian characters. You've got the serpent in the Garden of Eden. That's the most common one we would associate with a reptilian story. But did you know that the Genesis account of the Garden of Eden, when it talks about the serpent, never calls him the devil or Satan or Lucifer? That comes up 1,000 years later in other writings. They relate back and call that character in the Bible, the serpent character, Satan or Lucifer and so on, or the devil. And it does call him a serpent at one point, but the word that's used in the Hebrew for the serpent in the garden is Nakash. And Nakash in Hebrew means illuminator, bringer of hidden knowledge, bright shining one. And I started relating that to other things I saw in Scripture, where if you go over to Psalm 82, the Psalms, the book of Psalms where people go for comfort and read, Psalms like Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Many of them Psalms of David. And there's one Psalm 82 where it talks about God using the name Elohim for God, saying in the English Bible it says, and God stood in the midst of the council, and he was passing judgment on them for something. And when you get into it in the Hebrew, it talks about, and Elohim stood in the midst of the Elohim, and to them, singular to plural, you are all Elohim, the bright, shining princes of heaven. And then you relate that back to the Genesis story with Nakash. And you have a character that's called Nakash, whose definition is the bright, shining one, the bringer of knowledge, the illuminator. Then you start looking at the Nephilim story with the Watchers and the sons of the Elohim, who came down and intermingled with human women and had offspring by them. The Nephilim, as the scriptures. And I question that a bit too, because of the grammatical structure of the sentence. It says, and the Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. After, as the sons of God came down and intermingled with the daughters of men and had children by them. And so I'm starting to think that the Nephilim aren't the offspring, but were existed. But you've got these characters, sons, the Elohim, in Psalm 82, which another word for the divine council was the Elohim. Elohim spoke to the Elohim, it says, and said, you are all Elohim. So, and they're the bright shining ones. So the bright shining Elohim, the same kind of character you see in the book of Genesis in the Garden of Eden story, Nakash, the bright shining one. Was he one of the Elohim that came down? Would that have made him then Lucifer, the star of the morning? Or, if you do a word study on Lucifer, that whole passage about Lucifer, you find they're not talking about a satanic being. They're talking about a human king. And so it's not about Lucifer at all, as we think of the devil or Satan. And so when you start looking at all this stuff, and this is all this crammed into 5 minutes, this is, a light version of what took me 30 years as I progressed thinking about these things and researching them. To say, the story is different than what we were taught. And so that made me drift away, and it made me start to want to research more, dig more. And then, of course, you find other things like Gnostic writings. You find other religions that speak of beings that are like this, similar in their cultures, which are different. Only different, different names, different characters, different things, but all kind of these same celestial beings that intermingle with human women. And so that's what really, there's the long answer to your very short question of, how did I start lifting off? It started because I had a question in the seminary that was not satisfactorily answered. And I started looking into it. I didn't start like the next day going, I got to dig into this. I just put it in the back burner, and I thought about it over the years. And then as I studied and researched, this stuff starts coming up, and you start digging, you go, wait a minute, now I see this, wait a minute, now I got to look into this again. And that really developed the line of thinking that I have today, which is still ongoing, by the way.
I think it's great. And I think, I wanted to ask you about going a little deeper into, as the story goes, of these gods they were weary of performing their own manual labor and bred into or genetically engineered or manipulated the DNA of humans. Is that true?
Well, what you've got, that doesn't come out in the biblical account. That comes out in an older passage out of the Sumerian or the Mesopotamian texts that talk about the Anunnaki or the Anu, which was the caste of gods that were developed, created, or actually existed, whichever one you want to choose, for the ancient Mesopotamians. And this is, you're talking in the Euphrates River Valley, the old cities where Babylon was located, cities like Eridu, Uruk, all of those places, which are now located in Iraq and Iran and that whole region. And the religious stories predate the Old Testament, predate the Jewish Bible, if you will. And so you've got the story of creation and all of this in Genesis, which was purportedly penned by the man Moses. Now, let me put a disclaimer in here. I don't think Moses didn't exist. I think Moses was a real guy. I think the Exodus was a real thing. I think all of this stuff was real, but at the same time, we probably have a different understanding than what the story may have actually been. And so I've got another call coming in. I don't know if it beeps on your end or not, but I'm ignoring it, but you might get some sound effects while I'm talking.
Nope, you're good.
But, so you've got this story. Moses wrote this stuff. I believe Moses lived in and around the 1400s BCE. He was born in, I think, 1526 BCE. And as the story goes on, he's 40 years old by the time they hit the time of 1486, and then 1586. And you do the dating system, you end up finding that Moses would have been about 80 around the time of the Exodus, which was 1540 CE. And then you go another 40 years out. Remember, they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Then they started the conquest of Canaan under Joshua, and that would have been around 1400. So I think Moses probably penned this stuff between 1445 and 1400 BCE. Now you look at the Sumerian culture, you can go back another 1500 years, and you get the stories of the Anunnaki. And you see the comparatives in the story. And in the story of the Anunnaki, what was it? It was Elil, the chief god, Enlil, Elil, the two different names for him. We're tired of doing our own work, of mining our own resources, digging our canals, tilling the land. Let's create. If you look at the cuneiform text and in modern English, it translates, he goes to Enki, brother god, Enki, also known as Ea. Ea is the way you spell his name. So Enki, Ea. And he goes to him and says, create primordial man to do our work for us. And so Ea, he goes into one of the goddesses and they create primeval man to do the work for the gods and to dig their ground, to dig for their resources, mine resources, to till the ground, to dig canals and trenches and basically do the hard labor for the gods. Then you have in the ancient cuneiform texts, you also have the story of the king Atrahasis and the tale of Atrahasis, where Atrahasis, who was the king of the city of Eridu, and Eridu, the ruins of that are still there today. Eridu was a city that sat in kind of off the river Euphrates in the backwaters of the Euphrates. And he went to their patron god, Enki, according to this story, and appealed to him and said, deliver us from the bondage to the gods. And Enki, what does Enki do? Enki comes down, it says, or comes up actually, out of the great underground sea, the Abzu. And he comes to his servant Atrahasis and says, I've heard your supplication. It all sounds very biblical when you read it. And he delivers all the forbidden knowledge of the gods to Atrahasis. And he and his followers help Atrahasis and the humans fight a war against the gods and win their freedom from the gods. And for this, Enki, Ea, is cast out. And Elil, the chief god of the Anunnaki, casts him out to the subterranean caverns of the earth to dwell forever. And then you take that story now. Listen to all of that. The mankind was to do all this work for the gods, to mine the resources, till the ground, dig canals, all of this. And then they want freedom from the gods until Enki comes down and gives them the forbidden knowledge of the gods, and they win their freedom, and Enki's cast into the subterranean caverns of the earth to dwell forever. Now, go up about 1,500 years, you've got the biblical story. What do you have? God creates mankind. He places him in a beautiful garden. He tells him, you must till the ground and keep it for us. And mankind falls, the great sin, eating the forbidden fruit. Now, if you look into it, I've written about this in my books, this situation where the serpent character, Nakash, comes and says, you're not going to die. You're not going to die a physical death. He says, but your eyes are going to be open. And so they eat of the forbidden fruit, and what happens? Eve eats of it, and then she gives to her husband Adam. What's the next thing? Poof, they're both naked. And it says they're naked. They realize they're naked. And they go cover themselves because God comes down into the garden in the cool of the day, as the passage says, and calls for Adam, and can't find him, and obviously knows he's hiding. And he says, where are you? And Adam says, we're hiding. And God said, why are you hiding? And Adam says, because we're naked. And he said, who told you that you were naked? And then that's when the blame game. Well, no, my wife, she gave me this fruit, and God said, did you do this? And Eve was like, well, it was the serpent. It was Nakash. He gave me fruit. And so, starts, and of course now we're all in sin, and every human being born after that fact will be born into natural sin. Or if you take the idea of systemic racism with the current crisis that's going on, systemic sin. And it's part of who we are now. And but then you start looking at all the comparisons. God then curses the serpent character, Nakash, says, on your belly you shall go, and all of this. And he predicts that there will be constant enmity between you, your seed, the serpent, your seed, and the seed of the woman, or of the humans. And you will always be at conflict now. And then you see all throughout the Old Testament, what do you find? Is that God, from the moment in the Garden of Eden, there is a prophecy of a coming Messiah, a coming Christ in the Greek. And that prophecy is where in Genesis chapter 3, while God's cursing the serpent and the humans, and he says there will be all this enmity between you, he says to the serpent, there will be a day when you will come and bite his heel, but he will crush your head. All rabbinic scholars, all Christian scholars agree that this is the first messianic prophecy. There would be one who would come that the serpent would try to destroy, but he would instead destroy the serpent in his power. And so this is the first messianic prophecy. And you see all through the Old Testament, from that point on, you see God saying there will be a Messiah. And the Messiah was also known as the kinsman redeemer. There was a concept in ancient Jewish law. And by the way, when Moses wrote this, Judaism had not existed. It didn't exist. There were no Jews who were slaves in Egypt. Moses was the first to codify Jewish religion. And so Moses is saying now that there will be a kinsman redeemer, an old concept, and that this Messiah would be the kinsman redeemer for his people. And a kinsman redeemer is the one who is one of us redeemer, the kinsman redeemer. And you hear this a bit watered down without getting into the technicalities of theology and language, but like at Christmas time. If you go to church, and a Christian church, and they say, Jesus came and he was born one of us. He was one of us. And he was all God and he was all man. That theory of the kenosis, God emptying himself of his godhood to become flesh and to become the kinsman redeemer, the one who would be one of us redeemer. This is a concept that started in the Garden of Eden, that there would be one who comes that will crush the head of the serpent, the one in figurative speech. And all through the Old Testament, what do you see? You see, starting with Adam, the genealogies all laid out. You go to the book of Numbers in the Old Testament, you will find 13 chapters of so-and-so begat so-and-so, and so-and-so begat so-and-so, and so-and-so begat so-and-so, all the way up to the time of Abraham, and Abraham to David, and then David to Mary, the mother of Jesus in the New Testament. And there was a purpose for this. It was showing that the Messiah had to come from a pure line of humans. He was going to be human. He had to be human to be a kinsman redeemer. And so the whole Old Testament becomes the story of race interrupted by the Elohim who came and interbred at the time of Noah. They had killed the whole earth, and God chose the one family that was not tainted with the mixed human blood and celestial blood of the Elohim, but Noah and his family, the only, if you will, quote unquote, pure human-blooded people that existed at that time. And so the flood comes, wipes everybody else out, wipes out this hybrid race, which is actually the wickedness that was brought to man that we all learn in Sunday school, was God brought the flood because of the wickedness of man. Well, it was really according to the story and in the language, it was brought to mankind because of the wickedness brought to mankind. And God wipes them all out. And then the line picks up again in the human sons of Noah that are pure human, not tainted with the blood of Elohim. And so you've got this whole story that starts there in the book of Genesis, which parallels the story in the more ancient story of the Anunnaki and Atrahasis the king and Enki, who rises up and delivers the forbidden knowledge of the gods so that the humans can win their freedom. And he's cast down to the subterranean caverns of the earth forever. And what do you have in Adam and Eve? A couple that God creates Adam out of the dust of the ground. He creates Eve. Well, there was actually Lilith before that. If you go into rabbinic teachings, you don't find that in a Christian Bible. But then Eve comes along, and what happens? They fall from grace. But what were they given to do? To till the ground and keep it for God in the garden. What were the original humans to do for the Anunnaki? To till the ground, to mine their resources, dig their ditches and their canals. And so you've got these parallels. Then you've got Enki coming down, delivering forbidden knowledge of God. What do you have with Nakash, the serpent character in the book of Genesis in the Garden of Eden? You've got a character that is the bringer of forbidden knowledge, the illuminator, the bright shining one. And so you find all these parallels. And an interesting thing, by the way, about the name Nakash as being the serpent in the garden, if that is the devil, if that is Satan, if that is Lucifer, if that's the big sinful character that leads mankind into sin. If you remember after the Exodus, when Moses and the people are wandering in the wilderness, and they keep complaining against God, so God keeps sending things to trouble them. You know, and in one instance, he sends vipers to kill them all. And people are getting bitten, the Hebrews are being bitten by snakes. And they all come to Moses, pray to God for us. And what does Moses do? Bronze serpent and puts it on a pole. And whoever would look at the bronze serpent, and the bronze serpent, the name for this item was called, remember Nakash was the serpent in the garden. The pole, the serpent on the pole is called the Nakash, the bright shining object of Nakash. And so you've got, and that event became the caduceus, the medical, if you look at the medical associations, the two snakes wrapped around the pole. This is what that's supposed to be, a play on those words. and the healing. And so the healing was from the serpent. So it's very interesting that not only did God send all the serpents, then he tells Moses to cast a bronze serpent to heal the people of their serpent bites. And what is it? It's a symbol of Nakash. Nakash, the one who delivered the forbidden knowledge in the Garden of Eden and became known as the devil and Satan and Lucifer much later on. And so I don't even remember what the question was because I went way out, but there's, I think, the beginnings of all of this and how it compares. Oh, it was about Sumerian religion, that they had a very similar story that I believe Moses knew this story. And he either plagiarized it or borrowed it, changed the names, incorporated it into codifying Jewish religion. Because remember, Moses, he was born in Egypt. He was born as slaves, according to the Bible. But he was raised in the palaces of Egypt. He was a prince of Egypt. I think I know who this guy is. We wrote a whole book, my friend John Ward and I, with two different exposés on who we believe the historical Moses would have been. I believe he was a man named Senenmut, who was the grand vizier to Hatshepsut when she was the pharaoh. She was the female pharaoh. And there's a lot of historical dates that fit the dating system in the Bible. There is a passage in the book of 1 Kings 6, chapter 1. Solomon, the son of David, builds the temple in Israel, the first temple, Temple 1, it's known as archaeologically. And there's lots of evidence that the temple existed where the Dome of the Rock is today. This is where in Jerusalem, this is where Solomon built the temple. But it says on the day that Solomon dedicated the temple in Jerusalem, and we know his reign dated to the mid-10th century BCE. And so right around 950, thereabouts, BCE, was when Solomon reigned. And they're saying that the temple 1, was built when Solomon dedicated it. It was the 480th year since the children of Israel left Egypt under Moses during the Exodus. Now, those are round numbers we're dealing with, of course, but if you do your math, 1445 to 1450 BCE for the reign, 950 to 945 BCE for the reign of Solomon, the dedication of Temple 1, you go back 480 years. I'm sorry, I got that first date wrong, but you end up at 1446.
Scott, wrapping up for our free listeners, I have to say your knowledge and description of research elements you've found is epic. I'm so happy you took the time to chat with me. Where can my listeners purchase your books, listen to your podcasts, etc., and support your efforts?
Well, most of my books on these topics are published through New Page Books, which is now part of Red Wheel Wiser Books. They were acquired about 2 years ago. You can go to my website, and I have links at the bottom of every page. I've got the covers of all the books, and you can click on them and go to Amazon or find a source where you can buy them. And that is at my website. It's my full name, ScottAlanRoberts.com. Alan is spelled A-L-A-N. And so a lot of people like to spell it different ways, so I always have to tell that. So ScottAlanRoberts.com. Click on that, and you'll find the books at the bottom of every page. And you can find out more about me if you want to know anything about me.
Man, oh man, his descriptive analysis of reptilian symbolism in history is a service to all. Scott has performed for many. In looking deeper into areas of our faith is noble, in my opinion, and Scott Roberts does a fantastic job of it. Myths of various cultures and religions coming together and painting a very clear picture. Man, the apple in the Garden of Eden sure sounds like psilocybin to me. Opening the mind's eye, awareness, insight, intelligence. But who am I to guess? Maybe illumination? Anyway, we are going to get into all that with Scotty Roberts and take a look deeper down the rabbit hole for part 2, delving into dragons, reptilians, Draco, aliens, and more. So to listen to part 2, go to heroparanormal.com under Rabbit Hole Patron tier for part 2 and the best of all our podcasts. Thanks for listening in to Hero Paranormal. Until next time, keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Evazine. Blast off, blast off.